Well, welcome back to another book club meeting. The book this month was actually one that I really enjoyed. Not actually, but I'm not a huge reader. So to say I really enjoyed a book it says a lot to me. Anyways, we read Radical Candor. And I'm going to butcher the author's name. Kim
Scott.
I thought it was Malone. Where am I getting Malone from?
Don't know.
Maybe it's a middle name. Anyways, yeah, Kim Malone Scott. Got it. Anyways, great book. Who was the one who recommended this? Was it you, Ben?
Yeah, this was a recommendation from Abby Cameron, who's the owner of Nourished, who we had on the podcast. So this was one of the 28 books that she recommended in that 5-minute conversation about what are you reading. So yeah, that was good.
So you're in the hot spot today. I'm just kidding. Well, I think we should start this out by kind of going around the circle and just gathering everyone's initial thoughts, whether it's how they felt about the book, some like really big takeaway that you are kind of sitting with currently, or topics that you really want to discuss, and then we'll take it from there. So Ben, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I did enjoy it. The book for me, I enjoyed the content a lot, but I also found towards the end it was a little bit harder to read. It felt like a little bit less like a Simon Sinek and a little bit more like a textbook, I felt. The content was really good, really useful, really practical, but it was almost like not even fair to say that it was the delivery, but there was just something about it towards the end where I was like, it's getting a bit dry. You know, and it wasn't necessarily even like the content that was changing. I just got to a point where I was like, I really enjoyed this book, but now I feel like I'm just like wanting to get through it just to kind of get it done. But some huge takeaways in there. I think one of the ones I wrote down, and I want to get this right, she's talking about how giving feedback is always personal, right? Like even though it's in a professional sense, that it's always personal, and so it doesn't really matter too much. Sorry, I'm just looking for this quote. How you give it, or if you say don't take this personally, or it's nothing personal, like it's always going to be taken personal. And the thing that I liked the most was that when having difficult discussions or having any discussions, it needs to be about the work and not about the person. And she goes a lot to talk about like, you know, you're not wrong because you're an idiot. Like those kind of conversations, like don't get people anywhere. They're not constructive. And it's actually quite hard to separate that, you know, the way that you sort of perceive a person and what they're doing away from what you think of that person as a person. And that sometimes that, you know, your misconceptions or whatever else are actually providing a guise of how you're interpreting what that person is trying to do. I guess for me, the theme that kind of resonated all the way through the book is we talk a lot about like your perception is your reality, right? Like how you perceive things to be happening to you and with you and for you is your reality of how those things are actually happening. And so it's interesting when you go into conversations, you know, whether they be performance reviews or whatever else, that you have to be quite careful of how you're perceiving someone's work or whatever to be versus, or their goals or whatever else you're talking about, as opposed to how they're perceiving it to be, and being quite careful of that kind of unconscious bias that inherently comes through in a lot of the stuff that we do. But yeah, the big one for me was that making sure you are objectively separating the personal from the professional, but understanding in doing that, you can't actually do that either, right? It's very hard to be critical of someone's work in an environment where you're still supportive of them as a person, right? And I think it's the way that information is kind of delivered as much as it is heard, which is tricky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the quotes that I have written down is more so just what the definition of radical candor is. And it's radical candor is what happens when you put care personally and challenge directly together, right? So it's almost like that idea of caring for the person outside of their role, the job, work in general, caring about them outside of that, so that when you are presenting them with, you know, potentially critical feedback, you know, they might take it personally, but they also know that you do still care about them personally because of all the trust that you've built with them leading up to that moment. Another thing I wanted to touch on that you said at the beginning about it becoming more like a textbook towards the end. And you said that the content didn't change, but it just kind of felt like, you know, you want it to be over. I think that may have been why. It kind of not necessarily repetitive, but it just kind of became a little bit like there wasn't a whole lot changing throughout the book. So
I messaged Jess like a week ago, 2 weeks in. I was like, this book just makes me want to read like Steve Jobs's like biography. Because she talks about a lot, like obviously Apple and Google would be two pretty big like influential businesses to work for and understand how they do things. But yeah, he just sounds like a very, from what I kind of have heard of him, like reading other stuff, like I think it's time for me to actually like read his book. So
Jess, what were your kind of main initial thoughts after finishing the book? Oh, I think she might be frozen, so we're gonna go.
So I've actually read this.
She's good. You're back. You're good.
Good. Okay. I actually read this maybe a year ago, and I felt like I had, like, reading it this time, I felt like I didn't read it at all. Because I don't know, or maybe I was ready for it this time. I messaged Ben a few weeks ago, and I was like, this is like, you know, the universe provides something you need. I've been going through some interesting chats with the team, like my team, and like I'm full high caring personally and really low challenging directly. I really struggle with that, and so this book was like perfect timing. And it actually prompted me when I had a team meeting last Wednesday before everything with lockdown happened, to sit at the front of my team and ask them each to say one thing that I could start or stop doing as a manager that would make it easier for them to work with me. And it was very confronting and very challenging. But one of the biggest things that came out of it was, you know, they basically said, like, we understand that you care about us and you love us as your team, but like business is business and personal is personal. And if you have to tell us something, we would appreciate it if you would tell us directly. And so that kind of came across as a theme with a few people. And so that was reassuring for me to hear, and kind of starting on this path and journey. I went down a huge rabbit hole. I like listen to her podcast now. She's a podcast, Radical Candor podcast, like all kinds of stuff. I dove in, I'm in. But yeah, so for me, like, it really made me start to go outside my comfort zone and look at what I really need to work on as a leader and a manager for my team. And, you know, how I've probably been doing a bit of a disservice to the squad by not being as direct as I can. Because one of the quotes she talks about with her dog is like, it's not mean, it's direct. So that kind of stuck with me. And that's kind of the theme I've been trying to take forward since, I guess, hearing it. Yeah.
Okay, I love that. You didn't even read it. You just kind of took it and ran with it right away.
I think she did read it. She just like didn't only
didn't need to read it. And Laura, what about you?
I think similar to Jess, I took it a lot in terms of giving feedback, like, to my team at work, and how my team at work gives feedback to each other. In like the environment I work in, the direct feedback is not a problem. It's the caring that's a problem, especially, and I don't mean a problem, but something to think about. I think that idea of like bringing your whole self to work is something that a lot of corporations don't always have. And that's a conversation that I've had with my team a lot, of like, what's the level of bringing yourself personally to work without just like oversharing and dumping everything. So I thought that piece was particularly helpful. And then I also liked the idea of rock stars versus superstars, and how it's not just you're one or the other. I think even myself, like throughout my career, I've had different points where I've been more on that high growth trajectory versus times where things outside of my life have been more important, and I kind of want more stability. And like just putting a name to it and understanding how each of them is motivated and how you can motivate those type of people, and you need both types on your team, was particularly eye-opening. So I like that as well.
Yeah, I love that we have you on here. I mean, I know, Ben, you as well come from like an office, like a typical office background, but Laura's like in it, like it's recent, it's what's going on right now. And I think that's a really interesting perspective. And then I'm sure as well, your comparisons and contrast between that job and also moving into the MTMM world as well, and very different type of company and business. But yeah, I like to kind of identify those distinctions.
I just have this, like, reading this book, I was just like, I wonder how our like performance annual reviews are going to go from now, Mags. It's just going to be like you and me and Laura just being like, and here's another thing that you fucking do that really pisses me off.
I care a lot.
I love you, but you know, like,
yeah,
it's funny that corporate contrast, right? Like, the bigger the ship, obviously, like the harder it is to turn. And I think that when I read like stuff like this, I often think back to like those corporate days and how situations like that were handled, or what the culture was. And I think for me, there was always that element of, and maybe I'm just like skeptical, or maybe the fact that like I knew that it wasn't really for me, again, kind of like tarnished how I sort of interpret it. But for the most part, like I felt a lot of that was just like a wank fest, right? Like, it's like, let's all gather around and like talk about like how good everything's doing. And then it comes time to like performance reviews and like, oh, you're doing really good work, but like the company hasn't had a great year. So it's like, there's no bonuses this year. So it's like, why are we having this? Why are we wasting our time then? Like, why are you trying to pump up my tires if the result's already being predetermined? Why don't I just say that? Like that sort of stuff. And I think and I feel for Laura too, because trying to change or trying to instill culture in a big like company or a big space like that is incredibly hard, and it's always going to be met with resistance. And I think that there is a lot of people out there, particularly in the corporate world, that are like, I don't want to get to know these people. Like, I just want to be here. I just want to do my 9 to 5, and I just want to go home, and I have my friends that aren't in this office, and that's where I want to spend time. And I'm similar to Jess. Like, I think when we started MTMM, we wanted it to be like an extension of family. And it was very important to us that the people that we were working with felt that and wanted to be part of that. But families still fight, right? And probably more so than in a professional sense. And I think that a lot to do, like she says, is because your family does expect like you to do your best. And definitely my family, we're not scared to call each other out if we feel that that is not the case. But I also think that of the relationships I have with some of my closest friends, it very much is that relationship where like the reason they're your closest friends is because they're going to keep you true to like who you think or who they think you are, or who you know you should be. And they're willing to call you out on your bullshit. And that ultimately makes you better. And sometimes you need to kind of, you know, to use an Australian colloquialism, like get a kick up the arse to kind of be reminded. And it's important to have those people in your life that will do that for you, right?
Yeah. When you mentioned performance reviews, Ben, it got me thinking about the frequency of these types of conversations and feedback. Like, I'm trying to remember if there's anything I can pull from the book, but you know, whether or not if something bothers you or upsets you, you speak of it right away, or do you wait for something like a performance review, or, you know, have an official meeting or more of an official meeting, or something like that, right? And yeah, that's just something that I just started thinking about at this moment. Any ideas, thoughts?
Well, I think it talks about like, if you can like make it not everything has to be a huge meeting, like where you're stressing about it. It can be like a 2 or 3 minute conversation where you pull someone aside and say, hey, you were late, that shit isn't cool, like be better, you know. I think for me anyways, I like think about a conversation, stress about it for a few days, and then it becomes this ball, and then like I like word vomit on the person, and it's not nice, and it's really messy. Where I think if you kind of just like create that culture where you pull someone aside, hey, like notice you were late again today, or whatever, like, are you okay? Okay, do you know that doesn't sit well with me, like we really want to, you know, be on time is a really important to me, so I expect that from you. And so I think if you can make those little conversations just more regular, and then it doesn't have to be a thing. You're like, cool, yep, no worries, great, I can work on it, and you go, sweet.
Otherwise, there's all this anxiety leading up to like a performance review that's like, oh my gosh, over this past 6 months, what have I fucked up? Or what, like, what have I done better too, right?
Totally. I think she says too, like, it shouldn't really, like, they shouldn't be any surprises. Like, you shouldn't go to a performance review and be like, you know, oh man, you've been really shit this quarter. And then they're like, what? Like, no one told me, like, I had no idea, you know, like people can't correct, I think, what they don't know,
Yeah.
which is like, that was a huge lesson for me too.
Mm-hmm.
How much, Jess, do you find like I find if you're a manager at like a corporation, like primarily like your job is to manage, right? Like it's, you probably got an element of work to contribute, but your primary function is to manage your direct reports who are actually like doing the work or the tasks, right? But how fucking hard is it to try to manage and like actually be working full time, like in the business as well? You know, like I find that probably like the biggest challenge is I'm working, trying to think of like where the business is like going, making sure I'm steering like that ship as well as I can. And then at the same time, I'm like, oh, I really need to sit down with Maggie and Laura and have a look at like their growth trajectory and make sure that they're happy with their role and understanding what they want it to look like so that I can try to help facilitate opportunities like that. I'm like, where are these hours in the day coming from where like Kim can sit down with like every person for every day? Like that's what it kind of feels like. And maybe again, that is just like a sign that it's time to get this business to a point where I am able to work more on the business and less like for the business so that that can happen. But juggling, like it's tough, like that is, it's tough. Like it's fucking hard. Don't you reckon?
Yeah, it's really hard. I guess like it's because I'm not a micromanager as well. So I think I forget sometimes that I have to do that. I guess like now I'm transitioning to just being more managerial than clients, but yeah, you forget that you have to, you have to wrangle people. I try to expect the best of people and assume they can do that themselves, but not everyone's me and not everyone's you. And so it's kind of like our, the hat we wear, like has to maybe, as you grow and progress as a business, change a little bit, be a bit more involved. And like you said, like chatting to whoever about how they're growing, where they want to be, what they want to do. Like, I think it just changes naturally, like a natural occurrence. So yeah, I don't know. We need more hours in the day. That's what we need, Ben.
Yeah.
And I think,
sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead, Laura.
The other thing I liked when she talked about providing feedback is providing or helping find a solution as well. I think a lot of people jump to feedback as being like, this didn't go well and just kind of like leave it. And as much as that is helpful, it's even more helpful in showing that you care to go that step further. And I think she gives the example at the beginning of the book where she's talking about a presentation she gives and she says a lot, and her boss kind of calls her aside and then offers a speech coach or something along those lines to assist. And I think that extra bit was a good reminder for me too. Like when I'm talking to people at work and I'm giving feedback, it's so much more helpful to give that extra bit, help them find a solution. Then they see my thought process, they can repeat that. And then it's like the teach a man to fish kind of situation.
Yeah. Otherwise I feel like there's a lot of pressure to be like, okay, well, now I have to come up with, this is how I'm going to work on XYZ, right? Mm-hmm. One thing about that example with the speech, the feedback that she was given, I think the person said like, you sound stupid when you say but preface that with, you're very smart, and kind of reassuring her that. But I still think if somebody did all that, told me I was smart and that they trusted me and everything like that, but then said, but when you say you sound stupid, like I would take that personally. I don't know. And I think that comes back to what we were talking about.
Nothing
personal. Pardon?
It's nothing personal.
But you just sound stupid. And I think in that particular example, it's almost this fear and regret, or I don't even know what the right word is, about all of the speeches you've done in the past where you've sounded stupid. So, maybe there's no like full win there, but that's just, my thoughts on the matter.
It's an interesting conversation to have when you, again, look at, like, I think it's somewhat easier to be encouraging people to be blunt when you work for like a Google or an Apple, when the like number of applicants they must have for each role would just be absolutely phenomenal, right? But I think that you kind of need to be a little bit more aware of that relationship when you are in a situation that we're in, where it is a small business, and it's like, I don't want Mags to walk out because I've like mishandled, or like, thought that, oh, we're Apple now, so we can have like these kind of complete culture changes and just be super direct. And that's not something that we've done in the past. And then have to go and then replace and go through kind of that effort. Like, I think there's arguably, like, arguably more to gain, but there's arguably like more to lose, I think, when you are not in a position like a Google or an Apple. Like, I'd love to have the resources to be like, Mags, like, here's a speaking coach, you know, or Laura, like, here's like we're going to put you through a semester at film school so that like the Instagram reels you make can have, like, whatever it is, like, it would be great to have. But the reality of the situation is like, I'm just trying to get everyone paid, right, for the most part, and make sure that like the business continues and grows and is serving the community. But yeah, I think that there's an interesting contrast there on just like understanding where she's going, but also having to somewhat like, what's the word I'm trying to find? Somewhat manipulate it in order to fit like the more specific circumstances of the situation or of the team or the environment that you kind of find yourself in, right?
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead.
I think you have to read the room a little bit too, of like who you're talking to. Like, I can think of people that if you said, oh, you sound stupid, they would not at all take it personally. But like, to your point, I would take it personally as well. And I would rather hear something like, you would sound like you know more about the topic if. And I think you kind of have to know that within your team too. And that's part of caring personally is understanding how they take feedback to some extent and like tailoring it a little bit.
Yeah. Because I know myself personally, I go down a spiral of like thinking about the past, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, these are all the times, you know, in that example that I would have sounded stupid. And that's something you can't take back. You can't control. Obviously, this is probably a bigger personal issue. But I think, yeah, the way that you're delivered the feedback can help with that. And like you said, Laura, if you know the person more personally, like say, for example, Ben probably knows that about me and can either, you know, kind of direct the feedback in a certain way and potentially help me with those issues.
Well, you're still here, so we're obviously doing something right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's tough. I think I know when we do our feedback sessions, Mags, like I've always asking Mags, like what's one piece of like feedback that you can give me, like something that I can work on, because ultimately I want to get better, and I am more than happy to admit that I don't know everything and that like I'm going to make mistakes along the way. And I think that is an important part of the team, is to, you know, if we are a team, then like this is something that if I'm going to be steering this ship, I need to be hearing from you guys about what else is going on to take into calculations of which direction I'm steering. Right.
Yeah. And I think with our particular business structure, and Jess, I would love to hear kind of how this pertains to you as well. But the majority of our work is done with our clients, right? Like, yes, there's a lot of, you know, business side of things that we do as well, but the majority of our work is direct with our clients, and Ben's not overseeing every or any of the like consults and stuff that I have with clients. So that's interesting too, because there's only so much that we can give feedback on, right? And I think a lot of it also lays in the, I guess, how it looks on paper in terms of what kind of our coaching is looking like. So yeah, kind of a different area to navigate there too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like when I have the same probably take as Ben, is like, you know, I can't be following trainers around during sessions, hearing what they're saying. I can, you know, I'd be on the gym floor with my own clients or myself and kind of venture out, which actually prompted me. We've sent out a survey to our clients this week about some anonymous feedback, which has been good.
Max.
Yeah, we did the same thing last month.
We did the same thing.
Amazing. We also did a 360 review with the team, so you know it's good. We're acting on what we're reading, but yeah, it's you kind of don't know what you don't know until you know it. Do you know what I mean? So like, I actually recently had a client of ours with another trainer who contacted me to reach out and say, hey, I kind of feel like I'm not getting the best of the service, and that was a good kind of like, not whiplash or slash in the face, but like just awareness for me to go, oh, okay, like maybe I need to be a bit more, have some more processes in place, like a survey, or, you know, maybe a monthly or quarterly thing where I kind of chat to their clients or not follow, but, you know, maybe sit in on a session or something. Oh no.
We got you.
Sort of.
Oh yeah, got it.
Yeah, but that's interesting because we very recently implemented an exit survey for our clients too. So same kind of situation. I wonder, Ben, is that where this came from? Is this where that came from?
No, I think that the survey is something we've been trying to do for a while, and it's true because again, like what we think we're providing, what we think we're doing might not necessarily be how it's being perceived on the other end, or maybe we think that one or two elements of what we do is super self-explanatory and it's not. You know, like how often do you take for granted like nutritional knowledge, and you forget sometimes when you sit down and work with clients and you're talking about calories or you talk about macros and macro profiles. And they're like, well, what's a calorie? Like, what do you mean by what's a macro profile? Like, what do you mean by that? And it's like, oh yeah, like I'm kind of making a lot of assumptions here quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was part of the exit survey, was like, what did you really enjoy? What elements did you do well? But we're more concerned on like what elements did you not enjoy, or what could have been done better?
Yeah.
And I think that's important. But again, like to the book, asking the survey questions or like seeking the feedback is not as important. Like that's the easy part. The challenging part is, how do you create an environment where people feel like it's okay to have those conversations? I think internally as a team, I would hate to think that we don't have that you guys feel like if something was bothering you, you couldn't say that. But I think with our clients, you know, and you guys know from the other end too, like how often do you go somewhere or do something and you get a survey form and you're like, okay, right? Unless it's like super bad, like you're gonna be motivated to leave like a super terrible review. But for the most part, it's just like, yeah, like 7s across the board, whatever. I can't be bothered doing this survey. So how do we create an environment where it's like, hey, if you have, you know, felt like you've completed this experience, we want to know about your experience. And so I'm hoping that like the extended conversations and stuff that we do have with our clients over the time they're with us do go a long way into like building that rapport and allowing to create space that they can have up front. And hey, you could have done this better. Or hey, remember when we did this wasn't like followed through or chased up enough, or whatever it was, you know.
I think it's really important to like ongoing throughout, you know, a client's journey or a client's time with us, that we do check in and say, hey, is there anything that you feel like is missing, or that I'm doing that's not supporting you in the way that you want to be supported, or whatever it may be, so that they then do feel a bit more comfortable. There's some clients who feel very comfortable, you know, giving their coach feedback and saying, I don't like this, I want it this way, I want it this way, I want it that way. But then you have the opposite side of the spectrum as well. And I think it's really important to know how they're feeling, because we're obviously giving them tons of feedback all the time. That's our role. But that should be to an extent reciprocated, I think, too.
Yeah. I think ultimately and maybe like lockdown as well. Every time we go into lockdown, like the people that pop up on my fucking Facebook and Instagram with just their bullshit just does my head in. But we've lost somewhat that ability to have those conversations. And I think that's quite sad that, you know, I like, and the last year has been a great example of that. But not for you guys, but I can't tell you how many people that I've seen who are cutting other people out of their lives over the past 12 years because of a difference in opinion. Like, we've literally lost the ability to have people in our lives that might have different opinions or different thoughts to ourselves. And I think that's not good. Like, it's not a good thing to only surround yourselves with like yes men, right? Or women, or like people who are going to just pump up your tires and pat you on the back no matter what. Like, that's very dangerous, to surround yourself only with people who think exactly what you think, because you're not then exposed to other opinions or other methods or other ways that things can be done and other ways to improve. Yeah, that kind of open-mindedness in conversation and actually, you know, I've never seen anyone change anyone else's mind on a Facebook status, right? So why people engage on that forum is just beyond me. But people become so defensive of their spot that to not even want to, like, to cut someone out of your life that's been a friend for 5, 10, 15 years because they have like a differing political opinion, like, that's not a very open-minded conversation. And if that's the behavior that you're demonstrating towards that person, why would I, you know, want to engage with you on anything? And God forbid we have a difference of opinion and that's the end of the friendship, you know?
I feel like that gets to that obnoxious aggression part where you all of a sudden
Yeah.
stop caring because of a difference of opinion or whatever. And then that type of feedback just becomes, it's no longer radically candor. It's like the obnoxious aggression. And I think to your point, people get caught up behind a keyboard and they don't have those conversations face to face. And I think a lot more, because even for us at work, like we do a lot of performance reviews, obviously electronically. And like when I sit down and meet with people and ask them for feedback, it's so much different than on a like the electronic form, even when it's like the third party, like they're not in the room either time, like, but for some reason people get behind a keyboard and they just feel like they can say whatever they want. And I think you have to take that caring piece into account and kind of incorporate that, I think, as well in feedback. And that's a lot easier to do in person because you can see that that's a real person and like it's a lot easier to care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
there's go back.
No, you go ahead.
There you go.
I was just going to say that, when we're comparing in person versus behind a keyboard type of communication and confrontation, I'm not a very confrontational person, but I find it very difficult to confront things with a keyboard because then your words are out there forever. They're permanent. That's it. That's out there. Whereas if you're in person and you're having a back and forth conversation, if you say something that maybe, came out wrong or whatever it may be, you can immediately have that conversation right then and there. But yeah, just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, well, communication is distorted at the best of times in today's like modern age anyway, right? And Laura's right. It's because we don't do anything face to face. Like video is great, but like just like dropping out is a great example of freezing. Like a lot of what you're saying, I'm actually hearing not just based on the words, but on like the emotion on your face or how you're holding yourself or how much you're moving while you're talking and where your eyes are going and all these like non-communicational cues that come out that kind of either add substance or take away from like the words that still will impact on how I'm hearing what you're saying. Elon Musk, I think I've talked about this before. Elon Musk is on an episode of Joe Rogan when they're talking about, when you speak, all you're doing is like, you're taking everything that you think and you're trying to summarize it into a like small piece of data that you can give me, hoping that I'm going to hear that and interpret and open up that data the same way that you've kind of thought of it. But that doesn't happen because how much goes into like what actually formulates your opinion on anything. And it's very, very hard to share all your life experiences to get to that point with someone when you're giving them one or two sentences, right? And that's even more so if that's done via email or via text or like emojis. I read this thing the other day, like imagine in 2000 years if they're like, they think emojis are like our hieroglyphics and they're like trying to figure out like how we communicate like just and like no words, but yeah, like the art of conversation, it's being lost. Like it's a skill and that skill, that like long form communication skill of you give me a point and I give you a rebuttal, but both of us being willing to sit in the uncomfortableness with an open mind and being receptive to, if you can present me with evidence or whatever else that I'm susceptible to change my mind, it's not something that we're doing enough of anywhere within the community. And again, being in lockdown, like maybe this is heightened, but like politics is a great example of that. Like when the pandemic first hit, like shit got done pretty quickly. And it was like, cool, when there's bipartisan support for something, the government can actually function like it's supposed to and work together but now it's been dragging on that it's just, everything just becomes politicized and it's not even about like what the best outcome is. It's just about, this is what they're saying, we're saying the opposite. And it's not helpful. And it's not helpful on a grand scale. It's definitely not helpful on like a smaller scale either, right?
Yeah. I quickly want to go back to what you were talking about, the Joe Rogan podcast. I should just listen to it because I heard so many great things about that episode, but that's my biggest fear when it comes to communication. And I've always said I'm a bad communicator or whatever it may be. And it's because I find it difficult to take what's in my head and put it into words. And then the fear comes from me presenting those words to somebody else and how they're going to interpret it. Because if I don't even fully understand, or I'm not confident that my words match what the thought process is, I'm even more uncertain that this person who I'm giving it to is going to receive it the same way that I'm needing to deliver it. So
like the subtext there, right, is if you don't understand something well enough to be able to explain it to me, should you be trying to explain it at all? Should you be like talking to me about it if you don't actually even understand it? Right?
Because I think when it comes to like relationships and friendships and like things that it doesn't just involve me, but it's another person, sometimes there needs to be that back and forth in order to then understand it. But it's initiating that conversation with that uncertainty that is just damn frightening to me.
Yeah. But like any point that you hold, if you're going to hold it to a level where it's super important to you, you need to be challenged on it from time to time. And a challenge on it should just be your way of reaffirming to yourself that, you know, this is important to me and this is what I believe. But we've become so like terrified that we're going to, you know, be found out wrong or that what we think isn't right. And we forget that it's okay to change your mind. Like that's growth, that's development. Like you change your mind all the time about everything. Why would this thing in particular be any different? But a lot of people just want to stick their head in the sand about like they don't want to hear another point of view. And that's not how either of us is going to grow. You know, maybe you're right. Maybe you have a better understanding of something than I do. And I'm going to come out of this conversation better because I'm now more informed about like whatever it was that we went in to chat about. You know, that's a good thing. Changing your mind is a good thing. Yeah, to not change your mind is ignorant. Like it's, if you don't know why you're defending a position, like that should be your first warning sign. But we've gone uncharacteristically off topic again.
I just want to say one thing to that, because recently when I was talking to my therapist about a conversation I wanted to bring up, but I was concerned about bringing it up because it involved me changing my mind about something. And all she had to say was, it's like a basic human right. I think that's the term to use, to change your mind. Like that's fine to do and it's accepted and everything like that. And so I think this is really solidifying all of that.
Especially as you get more data, right? Like it takes time to get the full picture, and like seeing one piece you made, like I feel like the masks thing was a big one during COVID of like, as we got more data and stuff, like whether you wore masks or didn't, or when you do and when you're vaccinated and et cetera, have changed. And you see a lot of people online seeing that as a bad thing, but I think it's gathering more scientific data, right? They understand more and more time has passed and we can make a better decision.
But yes, you're right, Ben. We've gone way off topic, but I think that's great.
Well, for the four of us that are going to just be the ones go back to re-listen to this conversation anyway.
Yeah.
Come on.
Beautiful. Yeah. Like you look at teenagers, they think they know. As a teenager, I thought I knew everything, right? Your life experience is so limited at that point that's like the Dunning-Kruger effect to like full extent, right? Like you know so little about everything that you have no idea about how much you do not know, right? And I think that you know, given our line of work, we're in an industry where there is new research coming out faster than we can read the papers on it, right? And ultimately we understand that there's fundamental truths that remain true with something like nutrition, but I think we all need to be open to the fact that if, you know, there were some studies that came out or some research that came out that suggested, you know, a rehash of like protein requirements or whatever it was, that like we need to be open to that. Cool, this is something we need to take into account, probably do some trials on ourselves and then understand what the impacts are and should we be rolling that out to the rest of the community. But to be like, no, we base all our like coaching on this sample study that was done in like 1968 and we're not willing to change anything we do from that point. Like when you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous, you know? But yeah, it's radical candor. But yeah, I think to my point was like the hard part is not giving the feedback. The hard part is like creating an environment where people feel like they can give you feedback so that you can both, you know, you're obviously going to take it personally, but you need to be able to put that aside. And you know, if I know Mags and I trust you and you're telling me this, I know it's not just to like pull me down, it's to help make me better so that I can continue forward, right? And I would hope that you know, that is like a two-way street with you guys as well when we do have some of those difficult conversations.
And I think this ties all the way full circle back to the first book we read, Brene Brown, and how I think it's important that you at least have a little bit of a foundation to that marble jar prior to these types of conversations happening. I think that's kind of the main way that you can cultivate that environment in your workplace, in your relationship, whatever it may be, is if you're, filling up that marble jar, I would assume that people would feel a lot more comfortable receiving feedback and giving feedback as well, because there's that element of trust.
Well, it's and she talks about in the book too, it's that like wanting to be liked, right? Like it's hard to give critical feedback because you don't want like to feel like you're bullying someone or like putting them down or whatever else. But I think sometimes, we all know, and maybe that's why it hurts, because it's like, I think when like you're not doing something to your best, and when you get called out, it's almost like, it's not that you get called out that hurts, it's that you're ashamed that it got to a point where you got like called out on that, right? Because when you're kind of just like floating along or like not doing stuff like the best of your abilities. And and so I think that's kind of the painful part of it, is like I've let other people down, not just like myself, right?
Yeah. All right, well, I don't think Jess is coming back, so we could probably wrap this up. It was nice to have her and her perspective for the first little bit. But yeah, any final thoughts, feelings?
The votes are up, the poll's up for next month's book as well. Me too, if you'd like to vote.
Will do. And anyone else listening? Might be too late, but hopefully not too late to go and vote.
What's your name, Laura?
Michelle,
make sure you vote for June's book as well.
She's not on Facebook yet. I'll help her.
Get on YouTube. We need the subscribers.
Excellent. All right. Well, very much so. Looking forward to our performance reviews. But yeah, otherwise, I think this was a great book and a great conversation. I'd love to see kind of where these conversations go, even if they are seemingly off topic. I think, it gets the conversation going and gets our thoughts moving. And yeah, it's always great. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. Girls, appreciate it.
And we will.
That's my final thought. That's my final thought on the book. When she talks about how, and you go into a group and you're like, hi guys, that you're like specifically excluding all the girls potentially in that room. I'm a big one for that. I just did it right then, right? Where I'm like, thanks guys, even though I know you're both not males, right? And then she's talking about her manager, who then makes a direct effort to say like, you all, like, how are you all doing? Not just like, how you guys doing? That's my takeaway. That's what I'm going to try to do.
Yeah, I like that. Love it.
Do you guys feel like that when someone comes into a room and says like, hey guys, how you doing, that they're like directly excluding you, or do you feel included in that?
I feel included in that, but I think that term has, when used in that specific context, doesn't mean males. I think it's just become a general, like, hey guys, like as in, hey everyone. And that's just how I've understood it, but I can see how it could offend, hurt, trigger some people, potentially people who don't identify as male or female. And I think that's learning more about that community the transgender community has opened my eyes to words and phrases like that too. So I don't feel anything when someone else says it, but when I say it, I do feel something. So it's also something I'm working on.
We talked about it at work, and it's similar to you, Maggie, and they agreed on high team is like the best one. It's the most inclusive. It's like, instead of, I think we talked about everyone, and I can't remember why that one wasn't everyone's favorite, but team is what we've landed on. So now all our emails and stuff are all like, hi team.
Hi all.
Yeah.
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 I think that's a nice, I don't know. It does feel inclusive when people say it. Like, it gives you a warm feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I like team.
Mm-hmm.
Gang, bit fam.
Yeah.
Y'all. Brene Brown would say y'all. Yeah. She can say y'all. I'm saying y'all.
Y'all. All right. Well, thanks, y'all.
Thanks, team.
I'll
see you in the next one.